A very warm welcome to Art Gallery Explorer, the vlog that explores and celebrates the London art scene. Coming up, heading, as hopefully you can see behind me, into Tate Modern to explore the first new opening here of 2025, focusing on Australian club promoter, fashion designer and performance artist Leigh Bowery. Bowery was born in the suburb of Sunshine, Melbourne in 1961, but he appears to be desperate to escape his suburban background and see the world. So he landed in London in 1980 and quickly became a fixture on the London club and fashion scenes. He was most well known for his outrageous costumes, and he also promoted a club that was incredibly difficult to get into, I'm led to believe, called Taboo in Leicester Square. But I suppose Tate Modern is showing him because of his role as a performance artist. He famously took part in a 2-week installation at the Anthony Defay Gallery in London. And also one of his most famous installation pieces is a very graphic and shocking piece entitled Birthing. I suppose I have two main questions about this show. Firstly, how are Tate Modern going to show an artist who produced pretty much zero physical art that was meant to last? That's a question I often have when seeing artists who produce performance art. And secondly, Leigh Bowery is obviously a fascinating person. So does his art deserve a show in London's premier modern art gallery? This show is on for a long time. It's now the 27th of February and it's on all the way until the 31st of August 2025. It is £18 to get in. So come and join me as we head into Tate Modern for the first time in 2025 and explore a new show here. Just a few things as we enter the Leigh Bowery exhibition here. Firstly, I've chosen some electronic music to accompany this exhibition, but if it's not your taste, then please mute it, as with all my videos. Secondly, this show was packed with documentary evidence and also photographs scattering the walls. I'm obviously not going to show everything in this exhibition. If you want to see everything, I urge you to get along to Tate Modern, if that is at all possible. Thirdly, there were some very explicit works in this show, not many actually, but a few, which I just cannot put up on YouTube. I'm not being prudish, but I just want to warn you of that. Again, if you want to see those, then do make your way to Tate Modern if that's possible. And finally, I'm going to provide a little introduction to each section, but also let you sit with the works and explore them as well. And this first room is really all about introducing Leigh Bowery, his background, how he moved from Australia to London, and the milieu he lived in, and also to give context to the artistic time. This was a period of the New Romantics, and so we see some of Leigh Bowery's early costumes in this room, and we also see how he lived with his best friend Trojan in London, in East London, and how he saw his whole life, both his home life and his public life, as dedicated to art and design. The second room focuses on London's clubland, because this, according to the exhibition, was where Leigh Bowery found his tribe. We're taken to the Cha-Cha-Cha Club, which operated out the back room of Heaven, the UK's biggest gay nightclub at the time. And this work, Are You Good Enough for the Cha-Cha-Cha, pays tribute to that nightclub. It features handwritten statements from people who went to the Cha-Cha-Cha, along with detritus from the club floor, and photos of the revellers, including Leigh Bowery. The exhibition explains that by 1983 Bowery was showing his fashion collections internationally. However, he decided he was more interested in creating designs for his own body, as you can see here, and for a select clientele rather than the general public. And London's nightclubs, like the Cha-Cha-Cha, became a catwalk for his creations. In 1985, Leigh Bowery and promoter Tony Gordon set up Taboo, a club which Time Out described as the most fashionable place to see and be seen in is Taboo on Thursday. The policy is simple: dress as though your life depends on it, or don't bother. Apparently, the doorman would hold up a hand mirror to badly dressed punters and ask the question, "Would you let yourself in?" The next room focuses on Leigh Bowery on the catwalk, and it has a nice section on Andrew Logan's Alternative Miss World, where the competition reimagined the Miss World beauty pageant to celebrate the art of transformation. Bowery actually entered Alternative Miss World and failed to win twice in 1985 and 1986. There's also a very touching excerpt, which I'm going to show you now and quieten the music, of Leigh Bowery performing on or presenting on The Clothes Show, a 1980s classic BBC TV show.
One of my autumn predictions. It's a beautiful garment which has these rather strong satin flowers swimming in a sea of sequins. Now trim this outfit with sequin gloves and sequin tights.
The next section focuses on Bowery's collaboration with choreographer and dancer Michael Clark. Clark was classically trained in ballet, yet he brought references to punk, gay sexuality, club culture, musical theatre and Scottish Highland dancing to his works. And Bowery, very much a punk lover himself, found himself chiming with Clark. Bowery provided costume designs and also performed in several of Clark's productions between 1985 and 1992. The exhibition points out that Bowery's everyday look was just as fascinating as his club and stage clothes. He'd wear bad wigs, tatty jumpers, heels in clogs hidden by baggy trousers, and he sometimes called this normcore. Bowery said he wanted to look like the weirdo on the street that you tell your mum about. Sometimes Bowery would wear these outfits while cruising for sex in public toilets and parks. Every environment, according to the exhibition, including the street, was a potential stage for Bowery. We then arrive at Leigh Bowery, the performance artist, in much more detail, and this section specifically focuses on the performance he carried out at the Anthony Defay Gallery in London for 2 hours each day across 5 days. He wore a new look every day, selected from those he had worn over the last 4 years. And this became a kind of sensation. He was behind a large two-way mirror, and in the mirror performance, he staged the very act of looking, treating his body as an art object. This, coming up in a second, is a small extract from that performance, which you can see as part of a 30-minute film in the exhibition.
I enjoyed it very much. I think it was interesting, but I thought it was trying to costumes that all was very decent, and I mean, I'd like to repeat to say this as well.
I don't know. I didn't really difference. What was
The section studio is really about Bowery's influence as a muse. He was an incredibly attractive
figure to different artists. And the highlights of this room, and indeed the exhibition in some ways, are Lucian Freud's portraits of Leigh Bowery. The exhibition explains how Bowery and Freud formed a close bond, relishing each other's shocking stories, and Bowery in particular was inspired by the painter's refusal to conform to societal demands. These sittings were tiring, and sometimes due to his HIV diagnosis, Bowery wasn't able to stand up and had to rest through lots of these. The final section of the exhibition kind of pulls together Bowery's later years. He got married in 1994 to Nicola Rainberg, despite being gay, and he described the marriage as a performance art piece, and the decision to get married was partly due to the fear he might be deported, as he'd been arrested for having sex in a public toilet at Liverpool Street Station. This also focuses, as you can see here, this section, on Bowery's giving birth to Rainbard in one of his most notorious performance pieces. We also learn about Bowery's band Minty and some of the performances that they took part in. Bowery died on New Year's Eve 1994, aged just 33, from an AIDS-related illness. But this exhibition is incredibly celebratory of this life and a life of his astonishing individual. Stay tuned as I share my thoughts.
Well, art lovers, I hope that gave you a sense of the Leigh Bowery show at Tate Modern, and it helped you decide if this is a show that you would like to visit or not. I have to say straight away that we obviously seem to be living in increasingly tense and dark times in terms of the world affairs. And so it was lovely to go into a show and see art lovers smiling in response to so many of the works. Leigh
Bowery clearly had a wicked sense of humour along with many other talents, and art lovers were responding to that with big beams, especially the video works where we actually get to hear him speak and articulate his own ideas. So that was really positive, and I have to say I left with a smile on my face and a spring in my step. That's not to say it's an absolutely outstanding art show, but I'll come on to that in a minute, because I always think about these shows in terms of the good, the bad and the beautiful before giving my final thoughts. And if we think about the good, first of all, I would say that this was a very vibrantly created show. It's full of colour, it's full of energy, it's full of music in different rooms and video work. It takes you right back to the 1980s in London. And at the heart of it is this titanic presence, 6'3", 17 stone, Leigh Bowery, who was clearly a creative tour de force, who was involved in music through his own band Minty and through his association with Boy George and Culture Club. He was involved in fashion design, clearly, and performance art, and was one of the most notorious and exciting performance artists in London at this time. But also, he was a muse for artists such as Lucian Freud. And I love the social history element of this show. As somebody who sort of came onto the London club scene in the 1990s, it was amazing to sort of see links to Leigh Bowery's world in terms of mentions of clubs like Bagley's, which I went to very regularly up at King's Cross. And you just got this widescreen view of an incredibly creative time and a really strong sense of Leigh Bowery, the person and the creative force as well. And so it was a really vibrant show. And I enjoyed that. In terms of the bad, I would have to say this isn't an outstanding or great art show. The social history and the biography of Leigh Bowery is fantastic, but I wouldn't say you're going to be hit between the eyes by seeing masterpiece after masterpiece. There are a few works like the Lucian Freud's which merit that description, but mostly this is interesting for its socio-political, cultural background and context. Now, I say that with the caveat of the fact that I do not have very much knowledge at all about the history of fashion design. Please tell me in the comments what you think about Leigh Bowery as a fashion designer. I know there have been a lot of shows on in London at 180 Studios, at the Victoria and Albert Museum, at the Light Room where the Vogue runway show is ongoing, which have explored fashion and the history of fashion. And I'm not averse to it. I love the Sargent and Fashion show last year, but I don't know if that counts as great art or not. And I suppose that leads me on to the wider question of, should this show have been held at Tate Modern, taking up one of the big gallery spaces? Or would it have been better off at somewhere like the Victoria and Albert Museum? I think it is just about justified it being held at Tate Modern because, it was in its widest sense about the art of the time, but it was a fine line. And so if you want to see great art, there are better shows. If you want an interesting social, political, cultural and biographical experience, then this may be a show for you. And obviously, the show's premise is that Leigh Bowery was a walking work of art. And from the photographs and the fashion items that he wore that we see in this exhibition, which a lot of them are kind of reproductions, I think, then yes, he seemed to be, but I think the issue with performance art and with photography capturing Leigh Bowery is you only get a sense of the essence of whether he was a great artist in his own right or not. You need to meet the man to be able to fully decide that. If you did ever meet Leigh Bowery, let me know if that's fair or not. I also had a more specific criticism, actually, and that was of the lack of a massive focus on one of his most well-known and provocative works of art, the birthing piece. It was a piece of performance art which sounded absolutely spectacular, with a human sort of coming out naked of Leigh Bowery's body. Another performance artist coming out naked from his body. I was expecting this to be a big focus, and there was a section, a room, as you saw, called Rebirthing, but only these 3 photographs was what I remember. So I was a bit disappointed by that, because I really enjoyed the in terms of the good again, the extract of his performance piece at the Anthony DeFay Gallery. It's about a 30-minute film, of which I showed you a little bit. And I particularly enjoyed as well from that, the video, which I didn't bring you, of people responding to this show. Some people are captured as they're coming out of the Anthony DeFay Gallery. And there's a really wide range of reactions, from absolutely emotional and very positive to very, very critical. So that was good. But as I say, it's not a great art show, but it is a really fun social, political, cultural and biographical show, in my opinion. And with that in mind, in terms of the beautiful, I could have chosen like a Lucian Freud work, but actually there were two works which really resonated with me. This letter by Leigh Bowery, which records his rather disastrous homecoming trip to Melbourne in Victoria in Australia. His mum is obviously incredibly excited to have her esteemed cultural figure, artist son, returning as part of the Michael Clark Dance Company. And they do a performance in a town hall in Melbourne. And mum, as this letter describes, I'm going to put it up here now, by the way, so do pause and read it if you can do. Maybe expand it on your phones if you're watching on phones. But basically, Leigh Bowery's mum invited friends and relatives from far around to come and see this show. And it was incredibly provocative, incredibly sexual. And it was a disaster in terms of parental pride. And the letter explains how Leigh Bowery's mum ended up crying in a hotel room, and he was kind of crying in a separate room. And it reminded me, despite his bravado and his creative force, there was an incredible vulnerability to his position, coming from a conservative Salvation Army family in Australia. And the other piece was an extract from a well-known 1980s BBC TV show called The Close Show, which had a segment on Leigh Bowery. And it really cut me up because he was such a natural communicator, so funny, so warm, that there's no doubt in my mind, if he hadn't been cruelly struck down by the HIV/AIDS virus, he would have gone on to be a megastar, especially as Britain became more and more comfortable with mainstream gay performers and gay figures, as we, thank goodness, have done as a country. He'd no doubt in my mind have gone mainstream and been a massive star if he wanted to. So this little Close Show extract from mainstream TV really struck me, both as a positive but also as one which got me in the heart a little bit. Overall then, I would give this show as an art show a 6 out of 10. But as a social, political, cultural history and biography of Leigh Bowery and a fun experience, an 8 out of 10. And hopefully that gives you, that's not a cop-out, by the way. I hope that makes sense, that judgment. And that will allow you to make a judgment about whether you want to go to this exhibition or not. It's on until the 31st of August. It's a big show, so if it is your cup of tea, £18 I think you'll find is good value. I mean, I was in there for well over an hour looking at all the documentation, watching the videos. You probably need longer than that to see all the videos all the way through. So do give yourself that time if you do go. And if you do go, post in the comments. Have I been too harsh with my judgment on it as an art show? Have I been too generous on my judgment as a wider show? In this case, I have not been able to bring anywhere near everything in the show. So do get along if it entices you to. And also, if you enjoyed this, please watch my Peter Huger vlog. This is a very different show of photography, but it kind of captures that same 1980s age, but in New York City. So you might find it interesting. Do subscribe and hit that notification bell for many more shows upcoming over the next few weeks and months. And thank you ever so much for watching.